Hi, welcome back to Full Bloom Block of the Month. I know Block 1 was successful for you and you really enjoyed that applique process that we taught you. So now we're going to go step by step through block number 2. So find page 8 in your pattern, which shows you all of the steps that you need for block number 2. And we're going to go through this step by step. So let's look down at the paper. So block number 2, the page shows you up here at the top, our color palette, which just shows you in general terms what we chose for the colors of that flower. In the lower corner, you'll see each of those fabrics and the fabric code from Island Batik, and these are the fabrics that we actually used from that company. At the bottom for the stem, in parentheses, it says block 1, and that's because that fabric was given to you in block 1. Up at the top, there's no yardage next to it, and that's because, again, that fabric was given to you in block number 1. So we're going to start and just go step by step. The first step here is to trace, and you're tracing these shapes onto freezer paper. So you're going to go and get your pattern in the large sheets. All of the pieces for flower number 2, they all need to be traced individually onto the freezer paper. All right, so we're going to look at the fabric that we chose for this flower. So block number 2 is purple. So down here, you see our color palette. So the light purple is the large part of the flower. This dark purple is the shadowing, or sometimes I call them highlights when really they're just shadowing. Then here's the center, and then this leftover piece from block number 1 will be the stem. And the background. The background, you should have a 1-yard piece. If you're going to be doing this through a shop and you're doing it as a block of the month, and you go each month to pick up your block, this background piece may be a long, skinny piece because it was easier for the shops to cut a 1.5-yard piece and then cut that in half on the fold. But if you're doing this from home with your own fabrics, a 1-yard piece is sufficient. So finding your block number 2 in the large sheet pattern sheets, you're going to trace each one of these shapes individually onto the freezer paper. So that's what I did here. So here's the large flower, and then each of the petals, the stem, the shadowing pieces, the center, and the center shading. So that's each piece traced individually. And notice that wherever a piece is going to be behind another, I just put a dotted line, just like this. So piece number 6 is a full line out here and a dotted line down here. That's exactly what this looks like. So when I cut this piece out, I know that this dotted line is going to go behind something else. And that's my reference. These are my reference points for when I'm going to assemble this block. So continuing on under trace, now we're going to do the small flowers. And the small flowers are in the back of the pattern, but we need 3 single flowers. And it says right here, small single flower. So the outside edge, the thick line, that's what you're going to trace as one piece. You need 3 of those. You need 2 flower bottoms. So for the double flowers, we have two pieces. So the flower bottom and the flower top. Again, just trace the thick outside line. And then for the small centers, here's a small center, large center, there's the large center. So following these numbers and using these pages, this is what we have. Each of these pieces is now traced and they're ready to go. We've completed the tracing, so now we're going to move on to the cutting. Following down on the pattern. Cutting instructions. From the background, you cut the 17 by 25 inch. It says square, clearly it's a rectangle. The 1.5 by 36 inch strip. The 6 4.5 by 4.5 inch squares, and the 6 8.5 by 8.5 inch squares. Next is putting those tracing paper, freezer paper shapes onto your fabric. So the light purple, these are the shapes that are required for the light purple. And they're all listed right in order. So I always have if it's required to cut a 1.5 by 18 inch strip from a fabric, I always put that first so that you don't forget to do it. So if you just follow these in order, then you won't miss any of the steps. So the 1.5 by 18 inch piece, and then all of the shapes. On this particular pattern, under block notes, it says to be very conservative with the spacing of this purple, because we are going to use this several more times, and because this purple flower is so big, you really want to squeeze these together as much as possible so that you have enough left over for the other flowers, which this purple will be used. Other fabrics, it's not as crucial, but I put that in the block notes just to keep you aware that this one's going to be tight. Another thing I'd like to point out now is under the fabric used again, it tells you where each of these fabrics will actually be used again in other blocks, just so you're aware of when you're setting it aside what it's going to be used for. So our next one is the shading. So all of the petals and the shading pieces, plus the segments of the small flowers that are required from this fabric. For the center, this fabric will be used again, but for this particular block, it's just that one piece. And then for the center shading, again, a 1.5 by 18 inch strip. That's going to be used for the inner border, and then those shapes. And lastly, from the leftover piece from block 1 is the stem. And they're all of the pieces that we're going to need to make this block. So that's block number 2. If you would like to review the complete applique process, please see our first video, Edge Coloring Applique, which also covers block number 1. But for this, don't forget, you just have to cut out all the pieces, get them glued, get them stitched, and you're ready to go. Now it's time for you to get up and make block number 2, and we'll see you back here for block number 3.